October 26, 1977. Stanley Spector, School of Drumming, 200 West 58th Street at 7th Avenue, New York, New York, 10019. Dear Wayne, may I congratulate you on your interest and initiative in seeking out a more productive way of working on your drumming through my program of instruction. Since you obviously want to know more about me, I certainly want to know more about you. I wonder if you would take a pencil and paper and sit down to answer the following questions, just right off the top of your head. Try and get this into the mail to me within the week. Here we go. 1. Age. 2. How long have you been playing? 3. Do you play in a group? How long? What kind of music? Problems you're having playing in a group. 4. Have you studied drumming with a teacher? How long? How did you select the teacher? How do you now evaluate the experience? 5. What did you practice before you began my course? 6. What are your goals with drumming? 7. What kind of music do you like most? 8. How many LP recordings do you own? 9. What is your academic background? 10. Do you own or have access to a reel-to-reel tape recorder? 11. Where are you now in the 6-week schedule? 12. What are your initial reactions to my course? 13. Do you plan to attend a college of music or a conservatory of music? 14. What are your preferences in continuing your musical education? 15. What is your time or game plan in respect to attending such an institution? With my personal best wishes, I remain cordially yours, Stanley Spector. The first part of the video explains who Stanley Spector was and how he influenced drummers clear across the continent. In the second part, I'll show you the original materials that the students received after responding to his ads in Modern Drummer magazine and sending $2 to Stanley in New York. I'll give you my perspective as to what it was like to be one of Stanley Spector's students who lived 3,000 miles down the road.
Lesson 1, line 1. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3.
Stanley Spector was a percussionist and drummer from New York, born approximately 1926. He studied with George L. Stone, famous author of the books Stick Control and Accents and Rebounds. Those two books are still in use today. Between the ages of 17 and 20, Stanley played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the West Point Orchestra, and the North Carolina Symphony. In 1950, he received a bachelor's degree from Boston University. According to a student, Stanley gave up playing entirely to devote himself to teaching. His fresh instructional method received written references from many icons, including Max Roach, Gene Krupa, Shelley Mann, and Louis Bellson, just to name a few. Among his students was Jake Hanna, who would soon become one of the world's iconic jazz drummers. In the 1970s, it's possible Stanley Spector was the first music teacher to effectively teach long distance, sometimes thousands of miles away from his Manhattan drum studio. He and his students exchanged lessons by mail with 5-inch reel-to-reel tape recordings and other printed materials. In 1977, Stanley offered cassette tapes as an alternative to the reel-to-reel recordings. His print medium was a typewriter, carbon paper, and a copy machine. His initial lessons were in 2 method books that he authored himself, including Stanley Spector's Lessons in Improvisation for the Jazz Drummer, Volume 1, published in 1958, also called Time and the 8-Bar Phrase, and Stanley Spector's Lessons in Improvisation, Volume 2, published in 1963, also called An Introduction to Method Jazz Drumming. Each book had an accompanying 33 RPM LP record featuring Stanley giving the lessons. He also supplied other materials, including sound sheets, otherwise known as flexidiscs or phonosheets, with his printed matter, and Stanley became one of the first printernet influencers with a worldwide following more than 20 years before the internet.
I didn't fit everybody in on it, so I've been meaning to say that for a couple of tapes, but I never did get the time. So I'm pleased anyway. I don't want to tie it up too long, so I'll just close this here for now.
As the saying goes, there are 2 sides to every story. With that thought in mind, you may now turn the record over to side 2.
In 1969, he was the first drum teacher to be interviewed by Downbeat magazine. At that time, Modern Drummer wouldn't even be published for another 8 years. Downbeat was the conduit to drummers around the globe. And Stanley learned quickly from that interview the power of print ads in the internet, or in the snail mail net. It wasn't until 1979, when Modern Drummer delivered its 10th issue, featuring Joe Morello and a young Phil Collins on the cover, that Stanley started his vigorous advertising campaign for his home lesson teaching program. I'm Stanley Spector. I can improve your drumming within 6 weeks. The musicians you play with will notice the difference. My students are among the most powerful drummers in America. My revolutionary method is taught in Manhattan or through a tape-recorded home study course. For information and proof of success, including a 20-minute recording, send $2 to the Stanley Spector School of Drumming, 200 West 58th Street, New York, New York. In February 1980, the 15th issue of Modern Drummer came out. Ron Spagnardi, the editor, reciprocated from Stanley's investment, having Stanley Spector submit his own article explaining his methods. It was titled Concepts, Challenging the Rudimental System, and it outlined Spector's fresh and some might say unorthodox approach to teaching drums. There you can see him there in the index. Flashback. 18 years earlier, Jim Blackley was also a renowned drummer, teacher, and method book author from Toronto, New York, and eventually Vancouver. Jim had also gained notice for his profound jazz drum teaching methods, and he wrote a letter on January the 15th, 1962, to another drum book author. And in the letter, he talked about Stanley Spector. He said, "Have you ever seen Stanley Spector's book on jazz improvisation? If not, why not drop him a line at 246 Stewart Street, Boston, Massachusetts? Tell him I suggested the inquiry. The book is fabulous, especially if the drummer is a thinking one." Jim Blackley's methods paralleled Spector's alternative views to teaching. It could be argued that Spector's approach to improvisation and time was particularly handed down through other teachers who opposed the more legitimate teaching methods. While living in Vancouver in the early 1970s, Jim Blackley opened a music store and a teaching studio at 2685 West Broadway. It was called Jim Blackley's Drum Village. His lessons drew students from hundreds of miles away, not the thousands that Spectors did, but Blackley drew students from a huge radius from Seattle to the interior of British Columbia. It was a tiny comparison, his shop, to Drums Only at 2163 Kingsway then, but Jim's students became many of the best drummers on the West Coast. Like Stanley Spector, Blackley provided free typewritten articles to help his students and customers. It was a treat to visit Jim Blackley's store and collect a new one from the rack next to his counter. His students, although not having studied with Spector, seemed to have the same ability to control and bend rhythmic time. One such student was Dearest Maxwell. Another was Al Wirtz. His students, although not having studied with Spector, seemed to have the same ability to control. I said that already, didn't I? Both mastered Spector's reiterations about the space between the notes. Stanley Spector and Jim Blackley both taught the unteachable. During the early 80s, when I was managing the Drums Only School for Ray Ayotte, Al Wirtz was teaching there. Al played differently. He could be playing at 200 beats a minute, and it seemed to take him all the time in the world. His roots seemed to be in Elvin Jones. Later, around 1991, I was producing a show for drummers in Vancouver. I called Al up. I hadn't seen him for years. I called him up to ask him if he would make a guest appearance. And he said, well, I haven't played for 6 years. I broke my back. Hey, sure, I'll play. Here's a clip of Al on my show. Not bad for a guy who hadn't played for 6 years due to injuries from a broken back. By now you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with Stanley Spector, the iconic drum teacher from New York City? Well, to answer those questions, we're just going to have to go back in time with music to 1977. I told you at the beginning of the video that in part 2, I was going to tell you how Stanley did it. But what I didn't tell you was that I was one of Stanley's students. And while he taught me, I was traveling with my band across British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And I managed to pull it off, thanks to the man who taught drums through the post office. See you in part 2. Well, that's not going to work. Well, to get the answer to that, we're just going to go... Wait for it. Well, to get the answer to that, we're just going to go... There was a groundhog. Distracted me.